Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. It's me, Ali Nitschke, and I am very excited that you're here today. I'm also excited to introduce you to today's guest. Today, Sarah Morse is joining us. She has 20 years experience as a nurse and humanitarian, which has taken her around the globe and given her a uniquely human perspective to the way we think, work and behave. She has seen the power of human connection to literally save lives. By cultivating a culture of courage, we all have the power to make an impact. As well as being a mum of 2 girls and a sought-after international keynote speaker, Sarah is the founder and director of Unchained Solutions, a social enterprise inspiring Australians to make an impact on modern-day slavery. 10% of all her speaking fees go into anti-slavery projects. Her approach to courageous leadership revives the workplace and empowers teams to thrive while giving easily applicable tools for them to use to create culture change. She delivers a powerful message that is relevant for every person grappling with the changing workplace. Sarah tackles tough topics like burnout, moral injury, and reverse culture shock with humour and a dash of sparkle. She will leave your audience feeling inspired, motivated, and empowered, and I'm sure that's how you will all feel after today. Think of today's session as a little bit like CPR for your team, helping them revive, survive, and thrive. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Made for More podcast. I'll be sharing my experiences along with some actionable advice to take your leadership to the next level. Introducing your host, it's me, Ali Nitschke. I'm a leadership and courageous conversations expert, a Nutella lover, a mother of 4 young boys, a wife, and a dance floor junkie. I'm here to give you the motivation you need to level up, lead yourself, lead your team, and your business. Let's go. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. Today I am joined by Sarah Morse. Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Good morning. Really great. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you on the show. For our listeners and for our audience, can you share a little bit about where did you come from and where are you going?
Sure. So I'm a nurse with 20 years of humanitarian experience. And so my nursing career has really taken me all around the world. So I started off as a 17-year-old. I won a scholarship with the 40-hour famine. You might remember that. And the World Vision Study Tour. And that was my real first encounter with people living in poverty. And that was really a life-changing couple of weeks. It was only a few weeks, but it really made me decide about what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted to go, which is to try and help people like the ones that I'd met. So I came home, studied my nursing degree, did a whole bunch of short-term travel. I met my best friend on my first day of my nursing course. She just got back from Africa as well. And she said, I'm going back to Africa at the end of next year. Do you want to come? And I said, yeah, great. And so we did. We went and worked in a little clinic in Zambia for a couple of months in a primary healthcare clinic. And again, that was, very formative at that such a young age. And then my next big trip that I did, I worked in Romania for 2 years in an orphanage. So I don't know if you know the story of Romania, but at the end of the 80s, when communism fell, they found around 100,000 children that had been left abandoned in orphanages across the country. And so when I went in early 2000s, I sort of thought, oh, well, it must be better now. Surely it's, it's been a decade since then. But with the orphanage that we were working in, we found children that basically had never been outside. They just stayed in their cot. So most of them were 5 to 10 years old, and they were the size of small toddlers. And so we spent 2 years working there in that orphanage. And I think that was my first big leadership challenge. I'd done other types of leadership before that. But the girl that I took over from was a really wonderful American girl called Ruth. She was only about the same age as me, just early 20s. But she had really set that up as a really strong example of servant leadership. So she went into that orphanage and she said to the director, we want to see your worst children. And he said, no, I'm not showing you the worst children. And she said, why not? And he said, well, if I show you those, you'll just run away and never come back like all the other volunteers beforehand. And she's like, no, we really want to work with those children. And so he took her to this room where our children were. So there was about 20 children in this small building. And she said, right, these are the children we're going to work with. And so when I arrived, she'd already been there for about 6 months. She'd already converted a rusty old storeroom into a beautiful, colourful playroom for the children. And then she left shortly after that. And so it was my job to take over leadership of that orphanage team. And so we had a team of volunteers. We were Americans, Australians, Romanians, British, all people from all over. It was a really big example of how to actually, first of all, lead a team from people from such diverse backgrounds. And also, it was a state-run orphanage. And so it wasn't run by, a nice NGO that had all the resources. It was run, these were the children who had been abandoned. And the workers in the orphanage, they were very aggressive to us. They were very hostile because they thought we were going to take away their jobs or that we were going to judge them. And we realized early on that they were just as institutionalized as the children, and they felt helpless and disempowered because, they had one worker for 20 or 30 disabled children. There was no way that they could possibly look after them. They had no resources. They had nothing. And so they had become very bitter and very disempowered. And so that was probably my biggest leadership challenge at that time, was loving and serving the children, but also loving and serving the workers as well. And it took us a long time to gain their trust. Yeah. So when Ruth had first started, she was saying, okay, great, we're going to bring in teams of therapists. We're going to show you how to do stuff. And they were like, whoa, back off, American lady, Yeah. And so it took us a year of just every day, just gently, loving the children, showing the workers that there was hope for the children, because they just thought, oh, well, they're just going to be like that forever. And we showed them that, once we took them out and we were able to cuddle them and do some therapy and take them outside, we saw the children starting to thrive and change. And so it was really a year of every day just serving them, not like we'd see awful things like children tied to chairs and, locked in rooms and things like that. And we had to just, gently just show them that there is another way. And I think we gave them hope again. And so it was a Christmas of that year that we rocked up to the orphanage. It's like minus 20 degrees. It was snowing outside. And on Christmas Day, we came to the orphanage and we were doing caroling. So in Romania, they do this, caroling. They go around to different buildings singing. And so we rocked up and started caroling at our orphanage and the other little buildings that were there as well. And we said, oh, we're here for Christmas. And they're like, oh, for the children. And we're like, no, we're here for you. We're here to serve you on Christmas. And we did this big Christmas lunch, and we had presents for them and for their children as well. And they were just bawling their eyes out. They were like, why would you do this? We've been so mean to you. Why would you do this? And goodness. We just said to them, look, because we want to show you that there's a different way, that there is hope. And after that, they really opened up, and we were able to bring in teams of therapists. So we brought in from the UK and Australia, we brought in teams of physiotherapists, speech therapists. I'm a nurse by background as well. And so we just started training them on the things that they could do with the children. And once they got the idea that they could actually do something, they really took it on. And we saw the children grow and thrive in ways that we couldn't possibly have imagined. So I think that was probably my first big step in courageous leadership, in terms of, something that was very hard as a young, 20-something-year-old, but to be leading that team of volunteers and also, teaching them and living our values and, always coming back to why is it that we're here? This is for long-term gain for the children. This isn't a short-term thing. But then also, in terms of empowering those workers as well.
That is just such a remarkable story. I think I remember seeing something on the news about those orphanage children that hadn't been outside and were in cots and were teeny tiny. And of course, as is the normal news cycle, I haven't thought about it again since then. So that's remarkable to hear it from your perspective. So you're in your early 20s then. How long did you stay there as part of that team and part of, I guess, turning around the culture of the orphanage and the team and getting them all on board?
Yeah, so I stayed there for 2 years, and in that time also trained up a Romanian team member to become the leader of that team as well. So that was always my goal, was, to leave sustainable leadership behind. And then, the team continued to work there with other volunteers coming through for a number of years after that. And so we were able to still hear about some of our children, one little boy in particular, Marius, that we taught how to walk, and he was sort of the first one that started engaging with us. So he used to be all curled up in a ball, and then, you know, when we started coming, his little eyes would light up and he'd reach out and wanted to be touched and held. And then over time, you know, we taught him how to walk. And then the girl who went after me, she was an Australian girl called Jen, and she said that Marius ended up getting adopted, and he grew into this great big, you know, teenage boy, and he used to stand out. It was a local family, and he used to just stand out on the balcony and wave to everyone as they walked past, you know, and, you know, just really understanding the power of that human connection that had changed his life. So, yeah, so that was 2 years for me in Romania. And then I worked for the same organization back in Australia. And I guess that was another big leadership learning for me. So our team in Romania, we had our orphanage team, but we had a bunch of different teams. We had teams working with street kids, teams teaching English, all sorts of different teams. And the overall team leader there, unfortunately, was a good example of toxic leadership. And so while I was I was, you know, working hard with my sort of smaller team to do servant leadership. I ended up getting pretty burnt out by working under the toxic leadership of this American leader. And so when I came back to Australia, the organisation that I worked for were absolutely horrified of the example that had been set for me of leadership and an example of not living the values of the organisation. So I worked for another 2 years for the organisation here in Australia, being a cross-cultural trainer and training up people to go short-term into different humanitarian contexts. And during that time, the thing that I learned the most was the leadership values of the home team. And they were like, we are going to show you what it means, you know, to lead with values. And so although it was the same organization, the same values on piece of paper, that was a really good example to me of lived values versus not lived values. And so in terms of servant leadership, the CEO of the company here in Australia, he was like, I'm going to show you what servant leadership is. So every Thursday morning we had our team meeting. He used to get to the office at 7:30 and make us all pancakes every Thursday morning, right? Like, you know, one of our values was sacrificial generosity. And so, you know, when the tsunami hit, I'm just trying to think of the year, 2005, I guess, you know, we wanted to send some money to help with the aid effort there. And so he put aside some money from our, you know, national budget. We're a small little NGO. We didn't have much money. And then he said, you know what, that doesn't hurt enough. Like, we need to give until it hurts. And so he doubled it, what he had planned to give, and doubled it. And again, just such an incredible example of living your values. And so that was that lesson that I really took away from there was, you know, the clear distinction between somebody who lives their values and somebody who doesn't. And so that's the leader that I choose to be as well.
Brilliant. So tell me a little bit around the work that you're doing now, but more specifically, I think when we're talking about servant leadership, I think there's definitely, when we're talking about working in not-for-profits or when there's a disaster or when there's a crisis, how about sort of everyday servant leadership when there's not a crisis, when we're not in a third world country, we're not having to swoop in and save people and teach them something? What about sort of as an everyday practice? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess that's kind of linked to the work that I'm doing now, which is I've got two main roles. So one of them is as director of Unchained Solutions. So my husband and I worked in human trafficking intervention in Spain for 5 years. I worked in a safe house for survivors of human trafficking, and he studied his PhD in the sex industry and human trafficking in Europe. So when we got back to Australia, we thought, well, what are we going to do with all this research, all this lived experience? How are we going to put that into practice? And so we started Unchained Solutions, which is looking at helping Australian companies to comply with the Modern Slavery Act, and not only to comply, but to lead beyond compliance. And so how to help Australian companies engage, first of all, with the issue of modern slavery, which is something that a lot of people are still trying to get their heads around. And then what they can do about it as well. So when we started that team, we really decided that we are going to lead our values and lead with servant leadership. And so we ended up with a virtual team, which we've had, before COVID. We just the talent that came to us happened to be from all over Australia. And so learning from that other national director and, other people that we've learned from, we said, we are right from the beginning, we're going to state our values and we're going to live our values. So the feedback that we get from our team, many of them have come from, corporate backgrounds. And people say to us, I have never encountered people who live their values as much as you do. I've never met people who are as generous and kind and compassionate not only to the issue of modern slavery, but to the team as well. So I guess that's my sort of first foray into leadership here in Australia and leading an online team. So I guess, in terms of servant leadership and what that looks like, although we're dealing with a big global problem, it's still day-to-day, business as usual. It's office work. It's looking at people's supply chains, right? So it's, it is corporate leadership in that sense. So I think the point is there about servant leadership is it just doesn't take much, actually.
Yep.
Like we are constantly blown away by, we'll give an employee a $50 voucher for their birthday. And they're like, oh my gosh, no one has ever done that before. And we're like, what? Like,
yep.
you haven't ever got a birthday present before, that we just have to start, with the intention of being kind, with the intention of living our values and servant leadership. And I mean, we don't get it right all the time, but, if ever we have a decision before us, and we have to make a decision, we always run it through the grid of our values. And we say, okay, and sometimes that means hard decisions, means doing things a harder way, not necessarily the easier way, but we know that the long-term outcome will be, we're true to ourselves, we're true to our own values, and long-term, the longevity of that is that it plays out in the workplace as well.
I love that. I run an exec leadership development program, and one of the first activities that we do as part of them defining who they are as leaders is around what are their personal values. And it never, ever ceases to surprise me that so often, we're talking about leaders that are seasoned, have been in the business for a long, long time. And they're like, yep, I've got my leadership values and mission statement in the organization. It's on a beautiful poster. It's in the tea room. I've never, ever looked at my own individual values. Is that what you're talking about? Is how do we live and breathe into our own values that also happen to tie into those company ones as well?
Yeah, I think so. Because if we're living our own values, we won't be able to work for a company that has values that are outside of our own scope of values, right? If we're truly leaning into our own values as leaders, I think the writing's on the wall in terms of, how we can actually engage with the values of another company if they don't align with those personal values. And I think that's where, I talk a lot about burnout and compassion fatigue. And I think that's where a lot of that burnout happens, is that disconnect of the values, that people feel like they're being forced to do something that is just so incongruous with who they are, and it puts such a strain on them as people, and then obviously on their leadership as well. And so I think as leaders, we always have an opportunity to say, okay, am I going to do it, according to my values? And that might mean really hard decisions. It might mean leaving a company that isn't values aligned. But I think always when we make those choices, my experience is that it might be hard in the moment, but living into those values makes life so much richer. And the longevity of those values, outlasts any kind of role.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, particularly because we're hearing more and more about burnout these days. Like it's a topic now. World Health Organization declared it as a syndrome back in 2019, I think. So we're only going to be hearing more and more about it. And I think people don't recognize, or they certainly underestimate, how much effort and emotional fatigue it takes to be doing something that's not congruent with where you really want to go and who you want to be. Do you have any tips for people that are going, oh, actually, this is sounding a little bit too familiar, like perhaps I need to do some work here? What would be sort of your first step for people to really unpack and recognize their own values?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously do your course. It sounds amazing. Brene Brown has done a lot of work on this. So, reading Brene Brown's work on values, she has a whole book and a whole, chapters and chapters on living your values. And she even has a long list of all the values that you can choose from. And when I did a Brene Brown course, I was really, they make you narrow it down to 5 and then 3 and then 1. Like, what is your one top value? And I was actually really surprised with that. So, I got down to my top 5 pretty well. Yep. But then when it came to really nailing in what is my one top value, and it came out as authenticity was the thing that I really and I was like, I can't work with people who are inauthentic. I can't work with myself if I'm being inauthentic. If my husband's, being inauthentic, like it just doesn't work, So for me, authenticity came out as my number 1 value. Yeah. So I think, definitely engaging with Brene Brown's work, but you don't have to go off and even do a course or anything like that. I mean, mean, there's books, there's, reading through that list and just forcing yourself to go, okay, if there was one thing I'm not going to give up, what is it? And I think that brings a lot of clarity, just nailing it down to that one value. And then it might not be an exit from that company straight away. Obviously, you still need to live your values the next day after you figured that out,
Yep.
But it's about working with the people that you're around as well. Can I actually change the culture? And that's what I talk to companies about, is cultivating a culture of courage within the workforce. So I work with a lot of health professionals, dealing with nurses and doctors who are burnt out, not just from that emotional, but the physical fatigue as well of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But not being able to care. And that's, again, it's the same thing as that everybody who's a health professional did it because they care.
Yeah, exactly.
And then not being able to care for people in the way that they want to has a huge impact on their mental and emotional state. So I work with a lot of health professionals as a nurse myself, to really think through how can we cultivate a culture of courage here within the hospitals, but then also working with corporates as well. So transferring that. So the issues are different, but the outcomes are kind of the same in terms of, for corporate, one of the big values, for example, is connection. So I talk a lot about connection. And what I find a lot of corporate cultures are struggling with is they haven't thought through yet, how do we connect in a hybrid workplace? So when we're used to just, being all together and kind of culture just happened. And yes, there might be the companies that have been really intentional about culture, before COVID. But now it's kind of like a lot of people are still saying, oh, when we get back to normal, or, when we have that in-office day or whatever. And it's just never going to happen. Like, this is the new normal.
We're in it.
That need to think that through. So what does connection mean when we don't see each other in person, hardly at all or ever? And getting intentional about creating connection in a hybrid workplace.
Yeah. So tell me how you link in the servant leadership with courageous leadership with helping workplaces connect in a hybrid world.
So what I talk about is cultivating a culture of courage. So I'm really bringing in the concept of culture through all my international work, working as a cross-cultural trainer, being a visitor in lots of different cultures as well, and then translating that to the workplace culture. So it's the same idea in terms of, if you were going to go to Romania, you need to adapt to the culture that you're living in. So the same idea from when we're at work, we're adapting to that culture, and what does that culture actually look like, and how can we define that? So that's how I'm sort of connecting the two of working through that cross-cultural lens and bringing in that to talk about the culture in the workplace. And then through my experiences, both as a humanitarian leader and then also as a corporate leader with our own team, and using tips and examples from our own team of things that we've done to create that culture in a hybrid work environment. So something like, for example, we had a team member that was pregnant, and we decided to have an online baby shower for her.
Oh, lovely.
And so I sent out the little baby shower packs. So, with all the dumb little games and, baby shower bingo and all those things that, we put ourselves through at baby showers and like, snacks and, little things for the baby and all sorts of stuff. So I sent out like physical packs to all the team. And then we all got together online to play the baby shower games, and we sent her a hamper that she opened in front of everyone. And, and it was one girl's first day. That was her first day on the job. And she was like, whoa, what is
happening?
Never seen anything like this. So, an example of just getting creative. It didn't cost much, but just having that sort of, a bit of planning, bit of thinking through. I had to send the packs out, obviously the week before, and, get the hamper organized and things like that. So it does take that little bit of intentionality and extra thinking. But she was just so blown away. And, that colleague that joined us on that day, she was just like, this is incredible. Like, and again, not hard, it's actually quite a simple thing to do, but just requires that intentionality around it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, like the pre-thinking of it. It's not just to scoot out to the shops and pick up a muffin on the day because it was a last minute thought. It's going, actually, we've thought through this. We're going to have a plan. The intention behind it is that we bring in everyone together. And I think that's almost more magical than what's in the box.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we just had such fun, and we were all females except for my husband, and he was like, was his first baby shower, and he's right. Oh, this is what you guys do.
Like, Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes, it is what we do. So tell me now, what do you think would be, I guess, some 5 top tips that you wish you had known back when you were in your early leadership days, or what's some knowledge and wisdom now that you would like to pass on to upcoming leaders?
Yeah, so I guess I've collected my tips along the way as I've learned mostly the hard way, but I've also learned from some incredible leaders as well. So firstly, it would be, I'm just so grateful for the people who invested in me early on, the people who saw my potential and gave me opportunities early on, right from when I was a teenager. I'm so, so grateful to those people. And so I would say find somebody to mentor, because there's nothing like, training somebody else to realize where your own values are as well. I was recently inspired by a Westpac executive that I was talking to who takes part in a mentoring program for disadvantaged girls. And, she's investing her time to invest in somebody that doesn't have anyone else to invest in her. And that girl wants to be a pediatrician, and who knows, like where that mentoring relationship will empower that young girl to go. So firstly, to find somebody to mentor, I think always be thinking about, who am I investing in? And then live your values as well. So that extreme example of, working for the same organization, but not having the values lived in the one case. And then on the other hand, just an abundance of values. So to live your values, to stay kind and curious, I think is another one. So, the world is a wonderful, wonderful place, and most people are kind and most people are doing their best. And to try and just keep that in mind, stay kind. Yes, you meet people that aren't, but I always just think, I always have a choice, in how I'm going to respond and how that's going to impact me. So to stay kind and curious, always be asking and learning. I just feel like I'm at the beginning of my leadership journey and all that there is to learn, so always staying curious. The other thing is to surround yourself with good people. I think that we can't do it alone. We can't. We have to have good people around us. And there's times when we do get knocked or we do get burnt out. We need those people around us to be investing in us again. And that might change a different season, but to intentionally seek out those people as well. And then how many is that? Is that 3 or 4?
That's 4.
And then I guess the final one would be to be a lifelong learner, just to continually be learning, looking at, what we can do to challenge yourself, maybe to go, overseas and get out of your comfort zone, to go and visit people who are living in poverty, because it really is something that you can't really understand until you've seen it and smelt it and touched it, and it's so easy to forget.
How lucky are you?
Well, how lucky we are, how many resources we have, how much we have at our disposal, and, to always look at how we can be helping others as well.
I love that. Thank you. So find someone to mentor, live into your values, be kind and curious and asking and learning, surround yourself with good people so they're there to prop you up and cheer you up, and become and continue to be a lifelong learner, whether that's here or abroad. I love it. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Sarah. Where do you normally hang out?
So at the moment, I'm a professional speaker, speaking to health professionals and corporates around cultivating a culture of courage. So you can find me on my website, sarahmorse.com.au. And, I'd love to be able to speak at people's conferences and, to inspire them to cultivate that culture of courage in their organizations as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'll pop your links in the show notes for today. Any parting words before we say goodbye?
Just, put me on the spot now.
I know I did, didn't I? We didn't prep for this one. Whoopsie days.
I think we covered it there in the top 5. Yeah, the main thing is stay kind and curious, I think. Yeah.
Love it. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been an absolute delight having you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode on the Made for More podcast, please make sure you subscribe to receive future episodes. And of course, 5-star reviews are always welcome on the Apple podcast. If you'd like a copy of the show notes or any of the links mentioned today, check out madeformore.com.au/podcast. And of course, if we aren't connected already, you can find me in all the usual places. Ali Nitschke on LinkedIn, ali.madeformore on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you have an awesome week, and I'll catch you again soon. Bye-bye.